Alright, so let's take a look at how to improve the contrast and all that. The selection that we have right now, if we store the alpha, we can see is the inner circle, and we can go and get rid of the alpha overlay. So we see better that the image underneath it is really kind of dull. It's kind of a mid-gray, couple of darker grays, couple of lighter gray areas, but really not a whole lot of fine detail to recognize. And that's where we could possibly improve it by expanding the dynamic range. And that's one way to do that. So another way we can actually a little bit more precisely work with it is in the animation. Where is it? The timeline editor. And with the timeline editor you can go and apply filters not just on a single frame but on the entire frame sequence, the entire timeline. Right? So that's what you see right here. If I'm scrubbing through that, you see it scrubbed through the animation. You see the preview here, and that's where the filter is showing what it's doing. If you add some color, some redness, and it's going to apply that only through the selection mask. So we still have that selection mask in effect here, as you can tell from the marching ants, and therefore if I add some blue or green or red, those will only be applied to the area of interest through the alpha selection mask. Same with the value adjustment. So here is where you can go and change the gamma a little bit or increase the contrast, and look at that. So now you have much more contrast, maybe more brightness. So that's a very selective way to do it. You can change the hue saturation values and so on. That would actually allow you to even change the hue, for instance, over the frame sequence, so it's not always the same color. For instance, if you want the hue to go from one value to another, see how I can make that happen right here, and then the value a little bit brighter. So I could go from one end to the other across the entire timeline. I can say, let's go to the first frame here and keyframe that, and then go to the last frame like so. And if you need more granularity, you can grab the portion, the edge of the window here, so you can be sure you're on the last frame here, or whichever you're targeting, and change the hue to the other edge, the other side of the spectrum, and set a key there too. So we now have a value for the hue that's changing. You could also do that with the brightness and the value of these, or the saturation. But let's just keep it as it is and render that. So as you're rendering that, it's rendering the changes of the hue value that are interpolating between the first and the last keyframe. And so you'll see the color on this thing change over time now. And there it is, kind of from a reddish tint to a bluish to a yellow and a greenish tint and so on. That's one thing that you can do to change the color or the brightness and the contrast, and many other things there. So many filters can be applied there. One quick way to just increase the contrast or the dynamic range overall is this one here. Expand dynamic range. That will apply it to the current frame and then ask you, do you want to do that for the entire animation? Sure enough, let's do that. So now we have a slightly better use of the entire dynamic range. Right, and I would say at this point this brush is ready to, this movie is ready to be picked up as an animation. A couple of ways to do that: perhaps save it as an AVI, or save it straight as a brush, pick it up as a brush. I'll do both. I'll save it as an AVI, and when you save it as an AVI, you have a last chance to indicate at what speed you want that to play back. Let's keep it 24 frames a second, and then here we'll indicate where we want to save it. So we'll put this one here under the daily dose for edible planets, wherever that went. There it is. And this is that sequence 1 or 2? I think it's sequence 1, yep. And we'll keep that smaller, colorful. Okay, so we give it a name. And then we'll also be asked to specify what codec we want, and that's where it's important to realize whether that codec can actually take your current dimensions. Remember, we may have a video that has odd dimensions, quite possibly, because I don't think we checked on that. So if this fails, it's most likely because the codec you choose does not have support for odd dimensions. There may be other, but that would be the most typical scenario. So I'm going to choose my favorite, the Lagarith lossless codec. Make sure the The configure options here show me I am not using the null frames. Even though null frames would be useful if there are indeed null frames, that will save me space because I don't need to save them if nothing changes. But some video playback systems or editing systems may not know how to handle a null frame. So I usually stay away with that from that unless I know exactly where it's going and that it is going to be able to handle the null frames. I do want it as RGB, and multi-threading is great, they'll go faster, and save it and OK that. So now this one worked. Some other codecs may have failed, who knows, that depends again on what the dimensions are and whether it satisfies the minimum requirements. You can always check here before you save AVI. See, this one has a buffer height of 277, and that most likely will fail in many of the codecs because it's not an even number, or a multiple of 4, multiple of 8. In fact, one thing I always recommend, don't rely on just the AVI save, especially if you use a lossy codec. If you use a codec that is not lossless, save it also as a regular DWA file, right? I mean, the edible planet sequence here, this will be a very quick memory dump. Quick dump. Okay, and it's fast. If you see how fast I went, it's fast if you went to a SSD, a solid state disk, but even in this case this was really fast memory save. The beauty of that is that it doesn't matter then if it's an odd number or even number, you know, if you have any concerns about the AVI not reading back properly. In fact, one thing we can do here now is we can load that AVI that we saved a little bit earlier, and let's see, where is it? Smaller, colorful, and see if that one, yes, you look at that, the preview looks a little bit odd. Looks like that save probably failed. The playback here will show us some sort of a diagonal skew, and that's usually because it is not happy with a may not be happy with what it got from the fact that there was an odd number of pixels along one or the other axis. This one has a little bit of an odd line here. That might be a side effect of exactly what I'm describing. So this is probably not in the alpha channel. It's clear alpha. Yep, it is indeed messed up the video. So what you want to do there is hope that the AVI, the video that we saved, if we open that again, we actually don't care whether it was, and there is the quickdump.dwa. Let's open that, and our original was saved. So we can go back to that, and before we save that as an AVI, we want to make sure we don't have an odd number of pixels in height or width. Alright, so we have 310 by 277. Let's go resample that. Resample. And let's make it, I don't know, 278. Who's gonna notice? 276. Who's gonna notice we are missing 1 pixel? Maybe 312 here, so it's a multiple of 4. If we increase the width, we might as well increase the height a little bit. So let's go from 277 to 278 and give it a nice good quality, maybe even a bicubic plus, and there you go. So lesson learned, it's always good before you save to AVI to verify that the dimensions of this AVI file are indeed compatible with the codec and that there ain't going to be some sort of a problem. So now we have 312 by 278, that should be fine. Let's go and save that as an AVI. Save AVI, and we are going to go in the same, but this time we'll give it a tag here, say this one is a good version, smaller, colorful, save AVI, and we'll still use the Lagarith codec because I trust that one is good, but this time we should not have that skewing problem. In fact, let's go play it back after the save, and there it is, spinning happily around. Alright, so that shows what to do when you are getting ready to save your AVI.